LDComics is a women-led, welcoming to all forum run by creators. We champion the graphic novel form, particularly works with an autobiographical voice. Our activity is towards supporting and equipping graphic novelists, especially but not exclusively people identifying as women. Established in 2009 by Sarah Lightman and Nicola Streeton as Ladies Do Comics, today LDComics is run by a committee of published graphic novelists: Rachael Ball, Emma Burley, Lou Crosby, Wallace Eates and Nicola Streeton. From the start, the core of LDC's activity has been the monthly meetings, hosting presentations from invited guests to a public audience in a welcoming atmosphere for networking and making friends. The introduction of LDC online monthlies aims to replicate the joy and stimulation of our physical meetups. Everyone is welcome.
Okay, so I am Charlotte, otherwise known as Charlotte with Ink. You can find me online that way. I was hosting the Birmingham LDComics for 7 years, and now I'm working with Civic Square as their storyteller. But I have been a comic artist. I am a comic artist, and working with Civic Square in Birmingham, which is sort of like a social civic lab experimenting with how can we prepare neighbourhoods for the multiple crises that we're facing in a creative way. And I also help out with Afroflux, which is creating spaces for the diaspora to explore past, present, future, and reimagine that in Birmingham. But it can be anywhere. So we've got a FluxCon happening on the 7th or 8th of October, 7th of October. But you can check out Afroflux on Instagram. And I was going to talk about my comics journey because there was a few things I could talk about. So I was an arty kid, like most comic artists. So it was very much, I used to love getting these art kits. I used to draw from like the Children's Illustrated Bible that my dad used to read me. My nan had like a how to draw anything guide that I used to trace. And this guy in the corner as well, you know, like he was my guy. So I was a very arty kid. And then in terms of how I got into comics, I was, you know, when I was reflecting on this, I realized that, you know, one day I made a deal with the devil, my sister, and said, you can have control of the remote and watch whatever you want if I can just watch one program at 6 p.m, like just one program. And that program was Dragon Ball Z. And it was because it was really great animation, really great storytelling, really great characters. And when I got older and I Googled, you know, what is anime, which is what Dragon Ball Z was, I realized it was based off a manga, which is a Japanese comic. So that's how I got into comics. That was my journey into comics. I was very much on my own for many years, as in like no one else was really interested in comics around me or the kind of comics I was into. I couldn't find any comics easily. So one day I met Sammy Barras at a comic meetup, and she had started an inspired comics group called Inspired, and they were publishing their own comics in zine format, so little comic anthologies. And Ken Saviour was there too, who we used to meet up with quite regularly. So now I have fellow comic artists in my you know cohort who are inspiring me to actually create stuff. We published 2 issues as a group, which was very exciting. And I applied for like manga G-Man competition and stuff like that, and like Waterstones competitions, little things like this. So my comic journey is getting started now. I'm like, yeah, comics. I can make comics. And then I went off to uni, as you know, tend to do, and I studied English literature and Japanese, and that just obliterated my time, you know, making new friends, stuff like that. So I didn't have much time actually drawing or doing things like that. And then in my last year, I came across a little poster in a bar, and I was out with my friends that said "Ladies Do Comics," and I was like, "Ooh, comic meetup! Oh, I like comics." So I went, you know, I didn't really have anyone else to go with, so I went by myself, and it was at the back of this bar. And you know, you guys have been to LDComics, so you know that it's very different from other comic meetups. You know, it's quite personal. It's quite you know, it's just brilliant storytelling from an everyday point of view. So I was into it. I was very much into it. And I only went to one meetup because it was my final year at uni. And then I got in touch with Nicola and I was like, can I start the Birmingham one? And she said, yeah, go ahead, go and start a Birmingham version. So Birmingham's LDComics was born with Sammy Barras, the one other comic artist I knew in Birmingham who had those kinds of links. And yeah, we met up in different locations around Birmingham. This is kind of what it would look like. With we always had some same faces, some new faces. It was different from the London ones because I went to one London LDComics and I realized that afterwards you were sitting amongst like editors and publishers and published artists. So it was a very different. I realized then that Birmingham was different. It was, you know, there weren't as many even because it was physical as well. It was in person. So it was, the topics were broad. Like it was great. It was great. And it was very cozy as well. Like it felt really special. So like we had a little piggy bank. We were asking for to pay for like prints and travel and stuff, and we traveled as well. That top right one is at an Afroflux FluxCon, and bottom right is at a bar that we were at, and Quantum Exhibition Centre. This is your average kind of meetup, and space as well. You know, it's quite, you know, tried to make it cozy. But still doing this, I wasn't really making my own comics. I was still very much, you know, supporting other people to platform their comics, and then working like I had a full-time job, I had a part-time side hustle in property, I had my fam stuff, and you know, like my life. So I wasn't actually doing like drawing comics, you know, to that, you know, in a way that would satisfy me. But I did squeeze them out over the years. One of my proudest ones was a hometown anthology, which was, the theme was hometown, and we invited everyone in LDComics Birmingham to share their story of how their relationship with their hometown, which was really interesting because I was going for like homey, like, you know, like, oh, nostalgic memories, but they were all misfits, which makes sense because we're all artists. So that was interesting experiment there, but it is a great zine. And so that was just hosted some workshops, and I also did some other comics here and there in this anthology by Sammy Barras and zine one, and I made, you know, and I did I was still making comics for myself. Like you won't really catch these online because none of them are finished. But this was a comic about when I climbed Kilimanjaro and what it took to prepare for that. This one was a submission to Hometown about Dudley, about Sedgley, and what it means to go back after university and what that feels like. This is one about a space witch. So, you know, I did some experiments, so still making some in the background. This one is about a relationship when your friend is struggling with mental health, because I saw a lot of resources for parents or family members or carers, but not really for the friends. And for this particular friendship, I was living with her. So how do you navigate, you know, a really dangerous situation with mental illness when you're living with that person? And this is actually complete, but it's still in the it's still back there somewhere. And yeah, got did comics all over the place really. And then I got commissioned to do a comic for an Afrofutures interview. You might have caught Florence Okoye in she met her at the LDComics, and she commissioned me to do illustrations for this, which was new for me. It was my first commission piece, and that led on to another artist-writer collaboration with Professor Imogen Tyler, who asked me to do a graphic essay of her essay on stigma power, which I did, and that was a really interesting process because I got into the flow of things, and he was using ink and brush more consistently, and you know, how you manage that relationship with the writer. And so after this, I got a couple more graphic essay commissions from this. So I really do like doing graphic essays, I realized. And so that was really fun. And doing portraits as well with ink, I really enjoyed doing that. And how I did learning how to do research for the comic panels. It was the longest comic I did. But once again, I still wasn't doing my comic, you know, like I was doing comics, but it wasn't my comic. It was still like commissions, and work was still up with admin and Fam and LDC. So I was like, okay, I still haven't really done my comic, that's fine. But I'm doing comics. I'm doing art. And then I lost a friend, a very close friend, a very dear friend. It was Ken, who I met from Inspired Comics a long time ago. And I realized that you know, this focus on other things, it would cost me. You know, it was costing me. I wasn't spending my time in the way I wanted to spend it. You know, like, who would set those priorities for me? I hadn't set the priorities that way. Because he was a comic artist, though I just knew that all his sketchbooks were just lying there, and that mine would too. So I started to make time for comics. I was like, nah, man, nah, man. Okay, gotta make the time. So, and I really did make a life jig after that. I'm not gonna, like, I quit my job. I tried other going freelance in different ways. I quit my side hustle even. Like, I really did strive to make time for what I really wanted to do. And around that time, the SelfMadeHero were doing a graphic anthology program where it was 6 months, 3 months, where we had mentorship and weekly classes on how to make comics. And I was like, that's how I make time for comics. Like, I make someone make me make time for comics, and it worked for me. You know, having that accountability. And even with that accountability, like Woodrow Phoenix did have to say, like, are you putting the time in? Like, are you focused on this? And I had to be like, because I still had a full-time job. I went back into full-time work in a job I actually like this time. But he was right. Like, yeah, you're right. I need to put the time in. There's no other way to do it. I need to say no to people. I need to say no to their birthday. I need to say no to that night. I need to say no to whatever program I was binge watching at the time. I need to draw this thing, which was useful. And so you can find Satire and Clay in the published anthology called Catalyst by SelfMadeHero, which is about a shapeshifter who's deciding whether to settle down or to explore her roots. And we went over the techniques of how you build a character from scratch, which is very useful to get out this character. And he was really fun, and I really liked the character who came out of it, because I come from a lot of years, you know, LDComics is very much graphic memoir. A lot of me did go into her, and I think that maybe that happens all the time anyway, into her character. For example, at one point she's talking about how she can adapt, but she wants to, you know, she wants to do something for herself. Like, she wants to explore her own heritage, which is kind of where I was at the time in terms of my comic art. So yeah, so she's quite an empowering figure that I kind of created in this little story. The reason, so Rachel actually asked me to do LDComics a few months ago, but I wasn't ready for it because I don't know, I felt weird about this comic that I'd made, this short story, and it was partly because of this one page where I wanted to share her motivation for why she felt the need to go and explore her past and her heritage. But I'm really not into the phrase black trauma porn. Like when black artists have to, go into all the crappiness in order to sell their wares, and people too, to be fair. Anyone does, but black trauma porn is just a thing, man. Like, you know, the TV shows that keeps on reciting it. So I really didn't want to touch it, and yet I still did in this comic. So I think that's why I kind of put it on the shelf in my brain a little bit. However, you know, it was in such a way that the reason I touched on it is because she's a shapeshifter who was born from a human. But the reason I touched on it was because my education at school was very much just this, in terms of like Black history, like my history, you know, like the Black side of my history. It was very much just sardines on a little boat, which was annoying at this point in my life, when I wanted to feel more, you know, learn about all the other stuff that had happened before and around it, and the relationship between England and Jamaica. Like, I wanted to know more about it. So that's why it was sort of, I feel like I needed to get it down in order to kind of move past it. So it's down now, it's out in the world. And I still got in the you know, Black Joy bit. I did get in the love story. It was mostly a love story, the majority of the pages. And I myself went on a little, you know, I mentioned that so I found quite a bit of myself in that character. And I myself did go on a little journey after that, you know. Like I said, I'd started a new job. That job was at Civic Square. I started May last year as the storyteller. And on my first day, they gave me a bunch of books to read. And I freaking love books. Like, if I'm walking down a high street, I'll just find myself, oh, I'm in a bookshop. Oh, okay, I'm here again. I'm that kind of person. So I really have been devouring a lot of books about economics and decolonizing economics, and so that has, you know, got me reflecting, like, even in terms of that story about Satia, the shapeshifter, and, you know, why she wants to look back into her heritage. You know, like, we're in multiple crises right now: cost of living crisis, energy crisis, you know, climate crisis. And I've sussed now that I used to think that climate crisis, it was all capitalism. It starts with capitalism, but now I'm kind of sussing, okay, colonialism kind of came first. Like, you need to divorce yourself from your relationship with the land and not give, you know, think you can own land, and then you can start thinking in terms of, okay, now I can own people and I can own things, and I deserve to own things. So I was sort of maturing in my understanding of my work and my identity, I guess, and what I want to do. So one of the projects I've been getting into now is that land piece. Like, a lot of the issues we have right now does come back to land and law, and how law is shaped by story, especially origin stories. So just like Satia, who's going back and looking into her roots, so I started to look at English roots and English origin stories. I came across one that was about Brutus, and he comes from the Battle of Troy, and he killed all the giants. Like, the goddess Diana said, you know, conquer that fertile land of Britain, and so he did, and he killed all the giants, and then Brutus became Britain. So no wonder our laws have, like, immigration laws and, you know, ownership laws and stuff like that, if that's the kind of, you know, medieval Britain where this is the origin story. But then there's a prequel written where 30 sisters sailed from Syria. They were exiled, so they just came to the island on a rudderless ship, and they got with the natives and then gave birth to the giants. But what's cool about this story is that they didn't go to conquer, they just came to live, and they were, you know, in medieval Britain, the origin story was from Syrian refugees. Like, that's quite cool, you know. So I could, you know, play with this. So that's something I'm playing with. And on the other hand of that, while I was also working like that, I did, my granddad passed away in Jamaica, and I didn't have because he's in Jamaica and he's been there my whole life, my relationship to him was a phone call. Like, I met him a few times personally, but it was mostly phone call. So I had to, because I'm on this kind of going back into my roots and mindset, I did want to learn about, okay, damn, I've missed my chance, but what was that like, him coming over here? What is his relationship to Britain? you know, that's the story, and his story touches all our stories. His story is the British story, so I looked into it. And it meant that I had to do research around it. I couldn't ask him, so I asked Dad, and then I looked at what was happening around that time, where he was, when he was there, you know, politics around that time. And so I've got that little published comic zine thing. I've self-published that, and that's the beginning. I handed it out at his funeral just to my family members. It was like 450 people were at the funeral in Jamaica, up in these hills, and I was just handing out this story saying, this is as much as I know, tell me more. And I did, and I found out more. Like, he was a sound man, like the stuff that he did back then in England, you know, they were you know, he flourished, he thrived at a time when, you know, looking like him, you couldn't get a house, or you wouldn't let into bars. So they, you know, they had their own nights out, or they started an allotments. We're in a food crisis. He had allotments. They didn't have to worry about food. They did it all together as a community. Like tactics, man. He had them. So, I was learning a lot of practical stuff, as well as connecting it to the bigger picture of laws right now in relation to land and things like that. And yeah, so when I was making it, I was just digging into researching around it, the cartoons, the comics around the time, and the newspaper headlines around the time. You know, visiting the places he used to work and illustrating those places, and going through that place's Facebook at the people. Can you let me know about time, by the way? I don't have a clock.
Like, that's 20 minutes, but you could have one more minute.
Okay, one more minute. I'm going to go speedy then. I'm near the end now. So now, current project is there is a comic called Dreams of a Low Carbon Future that the University of Leeds did. I'm still working with Civic Square. I'm still getting into donut economics, which I highly recommend as a book. So I would like to, you know, channel that knowledge energy into comics, because I was just saying to the team, artists are to cities what worms are to soil. You know, like, we make it livable, make it fertile so we can grow well. I really think that comic artists have a huge role to play in what's happening right now, all the multiple things that are happening right now. So one of the ways I'm thinking is playing with this idea of illustrating the future we want to live in. I was thinking of calling it Dreaming Homes instead of Dreams of a Low Carbon Future. It's a bit technical, Dreaming Homes, something like that. But that's very much within the Civic Square spirit. I do want to expand on the short children. I want to make it easy for children to understand the relationship between law and land through Albina and her sister's origin story. I do want to expand on the, I called it a Fam Zine, like a family zine, the Fam Zine of my granddad's journey from Jamaica to Dudley, and what it meant to, you know, have the tactics to grow. You know, they started a little allotment growing community. I do want to expand on that too, within the greater context of Britain and Jamaica's relationship, because it's an interesting one in terms of economics. And we also have, like I said, BooksCon on the 7th of October, so get in touch if you're interested in about that. And that's me, Charlotte with Ink on Instagram, Charlotte Inks on Twitter, and charlottewithink.com online. Thank you.
I thought I would start with some influences, because I'm always personally curious, like, what are other people looking at? Sometimes you can see an obvious thread, right, from what they're looking at and what they do, and sometimes it's totally obscure, but wonderful to see how that path can kind of meander. I love a wide variety of comics. I've been looking at Nora Krug lately. I love her approach to nonfiction and mixing cut paper and very unusual materials. Peter Siss, I've loved a long time. He gets really personal with many of his books, and The Wall is about growing up behind the Iron Curtain. I also appreciate that he'll break out of the panels and use circles and side narratives in the borders. Then I recently became aware of Decker, an Argentinian artist. I just find him to be very surrealist in a delightful way. Brecht Evans is a big influence of mine. Some people notice that. He's just got this psychedelic approach to color, which I find indulgent in the best way. Appreciated Yumi Sakugawa for a long time for trying to illustrate very like cosmic topics that would seem unillustratable. And I love that she attempts that anyway, and I hope to do more of that. Eleanor Davis, I think most people know of, but I find the You and a Bike and a Road to be one of my favorites as far as its looseness. Here's a peek at the inside of some of those books. On the one hand, I'm really attracted to full-blown color, but I love what people do with minimalism and black ink and handmade textures. This is from Eleanor Davis's long-term trip on a bike. And I when I just see someone spill everything across the page, it frees me up to go just like, you know what, put in the daily time and don't fret so much about what are the rules to follow and how to organize things. So I credit several artists with this kind of very important message of just letting go, using comics in an intuitive way. So I'm kind of doing this backwards here. I thought I would talk about some really, really recent stuff, and then I'll back up and mention stuff I've done. I hope you all know about the hourly comic day, which I think is February 2nd, and I've missed it every year until last year. And in order to fit it in, it's kind of ridiculous. You're supposed to try to at least maybe once an hour jot anything down that you thought, did, or saw. I figured I better be pretty minimal if I didn't want this to take over my day, which it still did anyway. And I thought, why don't I just work with this kind of gray-green texture? I jotted notes down and then used a font later. But it really was a first-time experience for me to just try something in the most minimal way. I'm kind of an overthinker, overdoer. And it was just as satisfying or even more so. So I recently have been putting journal comics down every single day or several times a day. And it feels so indulgent to do something just for me. I do not plan to publish these or really share them, but I thought I would show this to you because I found it very freeing when I saw other people doing just very, I'm looking for just the right word, this kind of like sense of abandon. And to just grab a pencil, which I hadn't done for a while. And for me, it's just a chance to, every day it's something different. Maybe I am shoving bubbles inside of a larger drawing. Maybe things get almost diagrammatic. Sometimes it's all words. Sometimes I'm trying out square panels, even though I don't know how I feel about square things. Just indulgent in the best way. I do other memoir comics that are more, that these have been published or shared in an editorial way. You know, just kind of using comics to trace a sequence of thoughts. You see one thing, you think something about that, it makes you associate that with the next thing. And this was a comic about slowness, just like a meditation on what's slow, what's possibly wonderful about slow that we miss in our very fast-paced society. I made a series about the pandemic, and we were all really wondering, I think, in our isolation, like, what is that like for everyone trapped in their realities and in their homes and with or without various family members? And none of those are finished in any way, but sometimes I had something that was kind of like a moment or a day that was captured. This one about hands was, there's a group in Portland called Share that a couple writers have been facilitating, and we would meet in person, of course, before the pandemic. And then during, we did a Zoom version, which went quite well. And that is that a number of writers, poets, artists get together. The moment it starts, a single word theme is announced, and it was hands, and then you've got an hour to just respond however you would like. So I thought I would just kind of capture snippets across the past 24 hours of something I had done with my hands, which strikes me as a great way to approach journal or memoir comics, because it can seem like a pretty giant task to shove your life into little boxes over and over. So maybe take like your feet. Where did your feet go? What did you just see or observe as a witness? Maybe just a series of thoughts. What was only happening inside here while life was happening out there? Let's see, this one, a couple of times I've used comics to be like a substitute for photographs, because I just don't take cameras around anymore like I used to. And I had a birthday during the pandemic and had taken myself kind of run away on a solo escape. So I thought, why don't I just make a panel about everything I listened to or ate or did, and then I have this wonderful way to remember that day. Then I'm really curious about poem comics. This is a poem I wrote during, there was, and I think we're going to pick this up again. There was a tradition several family members had, some long distance people and some Portland based relatives, where we would get on and give each other different prompts and write, and then read the ones that we felt like sharing, which is not everything. And then later I thought, well, why don't I make one of these into a poem comic? So I have been experimenting with that as a way to kind of meditate on other, you know, poems that really mean something to me, but I want to take the time to like kind of memorize it and go deeper. I've been wanting to teach a class on this or something, because it's such a great way to take the complexity of language, and you know, poems are just like the ultimate as far as writing that has been so heavily edited and carefully chosen that it really warrants you know, deep contemplation. So coming up with colors and shapes, it's not easy. It's definitely one of the more challenging things I've tried, but of course that's kind of the point. Another, you know, I guess I'm not someone who has just made comics all my life. I wish I could go back in a time machine and spend most of my 20s furiously making comics instead of being depressed and doing all the kind of angst riddled things you do in your 20s. But I'm now, I guess I'm trying to make up for lost time and just wildly attempt to find out like what comics could be a vehicle for. Maybe I'll calm down in the future and pick one thing. But I was thinking a book review. I love talking about books. We're all bombarded with these kind of little synopses that you can find anywhere, you know, online. But I thought, how interesting if you could kind of look over the shoulders of some characters and like kind of experience what they're experiencing as they read or think about what they've read. So I've been doing this. I did a few on Instagram, and then I work for the magazine Illustrator. And so there's one episode of this in each issue where I review a picture book. So that's been fun. And that's my first experience using fictional characters. So I'm finding that to be an interesting task. I think, like Charlotte pointed out, you've got to really sit around and think about their backstory, what they're like a bit. So that's new territory for me. I spent a lot of time thinking about mushrooms, which anybody would know if they've glanced at my Instagram. But I would really like to put some of those into some fictional narratives. And this is just one experiment that I haven't bothered to share yet. I am considering another forum, like a Substack blog or paid subscriber thing to help. I think we all have questions about how to allow some readers to support something so that we can spend more time set aside for this. So I'm gonna see I'm exploring this fall. And this is also kind of fact-based, but with, completely anthropomorphized characters thrown in the mix. So here's stuff I already have done, going in my reverse order, as I decided to do. This was my first experience making a graphic novel, and it was a collaboration with Deb Olin Unferth. I got to meet her and stay at her house for a week, and that was just really wonderful. We got really enmeshed in each other's lives, and it was all black and white. For me, I would recommend to everyone try grayscale, because you've really got to think about what you can do with contrast, texture, composition. And if you can make something work, I think with those 3 lenses, then you can add color and it will for sure work. So this was a great beginning project for me to just start to learn. And a lot of comics is learning very publicly. Sometimes I find that uncomfortable because I want to be able to change my mind or refine stuff endlessly. I like to approach picture books with a comics angle. So I've done a couple picture books that have sequential panels. I don't know that I would consider them to be true comics, but comics influenced picture books, I guess I would say. And these were a collection of stories that I wrote about famous authors and illustrators, what they were doing when they were quite young. I wanted to know what their earliest, what things were imprinting them, even age 5. It's hard to find this stuff. Usually you look up someone's bio and it begins with where they went to school and all the awards they won. And I wanted to know why they even started to draw or write and why they continued, Then this is a wonderful story that is not written by me, about Venetia Burney, who was a 10-year-old child who named the planet Pluto. And I wasn't aware of this story until I was given the manuscript. And I think it's just, I've taught art a lot. I've worked with children, K through 8th grade. And it's just a great tale of how the young people of this world have fantastic ideas, but adults have to take them seriously and work with them to make them realities. So I just love this story. And some of the pages were broken up into comics panels. Part of it is because it's also a very slow story. There's a lot of waiting. A letter gets written and sent across the world. And so I thought I'd better make the most, try to get some action out of this whenever possible. And I think that comics are good for bringing you into the emotion of something. You can kind of tease moments out to become longer. Then one of the best experiences of my life, but a completely break-even venture, is a sci-fi graphic novel I made with my younger brother. We took all of our spare time for about 2.5 years, and we adapted a Philip K. Dick short story that we thought was like very relevant today, called The Pipers. And it's sold through Mascot Press, this website that my brother put together. And I learned a tremendous amount, and I also just thought the collaborative aspect was so wonderful. I hope it's something we can repeat, because we both at the end of it said, wow, you've got to select the right person to collaborate with. But if it's someone you would definitely spend plenty of time with anyways, that's a good start. And what happened then was we were able to approach everything that would normally be intimidating just without any fear, because whenever either of us would hit a wall, we would send a picture over to the other person and say, like, you know, please fix this. And then it would come back, you know, completely done over and improved, and just it magnified the joy while reducing all of the fear. So I'm a big fan of collaborative projects. Then this is something, the last thing I'll show you here, I just finished, and it will be out next spring, but it's a picture book about Christo and Jean-Claude. I hope you've all heard of them. If not, you can get the book. They are, I guess I would call them environmental artists, but they would make these giant temporary installations that really helped change how people looked at the world. They've transformed the definition of art. A lot of people argued, this is not art, or how do you know this is art? And what I love is that people talk to each other. I was able to go to one of their installations in person, which is the Gates in the Central Park. And you just saw everybody slowing down, talking to one another, sharing their impression, their opinions, asking questions. And, you know, many people spoke to one another that would normally just pass each other by without saying anything. So I broke up a lot of the pages into multiple panels to try to cram more in there, honestly, because it's very well written, but there's a lot we're trying to cover in one book. So this is a little preview of what that's going to look like. I think comics, one thing I also love is that you can try to illustrate or convey something that cannot be adequately translated into words or any language maybe. And there was one scene that was incredibly sad, in which the author wanted to try to convey a long amount of time passing, where Jean-Claude dies before Christo, and then he carries on their work. And so I just made these little vignettes and kind of hinted at their ghosts in the end and little clocks to kind of show that they had this collaboration and this artistic melding of ideas that then was torn apart. And there's very few words on this page, and I definitely had to sweat over this to get it just right. So I think that is the end of my slideshow. Yeah.
Thanks for inviting me, Rachel, by the way.
Thank you.
And very nice to see everyone in their tiny little squares. So I'm a comic book artist based in Cornwall. Originally, I'm from Austria, and I just had my first comic book published with Myriad Editions called Cyberman. So I'll talk about that one a bit later on. And then I'll also talk about two other short stories or illustrated short stories I did. And I think all my work has a sort of common denominator in the way that it often explores themes of a collective isolation in the digital age, and also a kind of intimacy in that space or in public space. So I'll just put that one away. So one of the one of these illustrated stories is called Ikera. I did that one I think 3 years ago for an anthology called Now by Fantagraphics. And it's I kind of started working on the story when I just moved to a new city, and I felt quite displaced in a way, because I hadn't quite like set myself up yet and hadn't known so many people there. So I felt quite lost and a bit disjointed. And then I went on a trip to IKEA to get a trestle for my desk, I think it was, and I found myself kind of really enjoying this space, this kind of because to me IKEA seemed almost a bit like a simulation, and there was something really comforting about it. And I think that there's something, how do you say, like I think when you're quite in a vulnerable state, capitalism is quite yeah, comforting in some way, or you know, in a how do I put this, yeah, it almost feels, it's like kind of when you're driving in the middle of nowhere and you see like a gleaming McDonald's signage, and it's kind of gives you some sort of comfort. It's a weird thing, and I think we're quite prone to be drawn to it in a vulnerable state. So so I came up with the idea of making a comic about that, and inventing this character called Akira, who decides to detach herself from her identity and moves into an IKEA store. So we see her in that panel here, and to her, all these objects around her, they don't hold any memory or any I'll just take any association. So it's, for her, it's an objective space where she can just exist. And I think one thing that's very inviting with comics, or that I personally really enjoy about comics, is that it gives you so much room to experiment with the form and how the form can relate to the content. So in this case, for example, I wanted to tell the story. So it's written from an inner monologue, and I've layouted it to look like an IKEA catalog. So all the images are indexed, and the number refers to the inner monologue that Akira is having within herself in the space. Yeah, and IKEA is like almost like a theme park to her, where she can just play. And then this is another illustrated short story I did, I think, even before Akira. It's quite long ago now. But this one is, so it is also linked to the thematic, but I don't know if any one of you know about the broadcasting genre mukbang. So I'll explain just quickly. It's a broadcasting genre where people eat often quite large quantities of food, but in isolation. And then they film themselves and put it online. So it started in Korea, I think, this broadcasting genre. And it started by a group of students who didn't want to eat by themselves. So they moved away from their families. And because in Korea, there's a big tradition of like social eating. So you eat with your family, relatives, and friends. So in order to feel less lonely or awkward eating alone, these students started filming themselves and putting the videos online. So I watched loads and loads of these videos, and there were 5 broadcasters that stood out to me that I just got quite addicted to watching their videos in a way. And then I started drawing these broadcasters, and I transcribed the text. I'll just go to the next slide. So I started transcribing the text from the videos, and put them in a comic together. And I kind of formed a fictional dinner conversation between those broadcasters. So all the text is actually from the original text from the videos, but I arranged them and adjusted it so that they would respond to each other. And it's interesting because a lot of the time these podcasters will kind of talk about the individual sorrows and share kind of their worries with the audience, but often they would have quite like a collective, how do I say this, a collective meaning in a way, or it would overlap a lot. So yeah, so I put these together in a way that they respond to each other, and often the conversation would be a bit off and I would jump in time. But yeah, the idea was to create this fictional conversation. And then this is the book that I recently had published. So it's called Cyberman, and it came out last June. And it's my first graphic novel, and it's a documentary in form of a graphic novel. So it's non-fiction, and I started working on it during my MA, so my postgrad, which was in authorial illustration. And so it's about a man called Ari who lives in Finland, and he streams his life online 24 hours, 7 days a week. So he sits in front of the computer. Most of the time he watches videos on YouTube or engages with his viewers. Often he's just sleeping, or sometimes he's playing with his cat. And I think I was instantly quite struck by the unadulterated presentation of himself, because he doesn't really make an effort to entertain the audience, but he just exists basically. And I came across him because I read an article about him online. And then when I first clicked on his website and opened his stream, it was quite uncomfortable to watch. So it felt really intrusive to watch someone so closely and so intimately, especially someone who had quite like a downbeat presence to him, I guess. So it felt, in a way, it felt a bit exploitative, and also it made me feel like a voyeur. But I think because we engage in so much voyeurism in a way through social media and the digital age, and I mean in terms of like scrolling through people's Instagram accounts and people's Facebook profile pictures and all of that I kind of didn't want to just close the window and move on to something else, but I kind of wanted to actively engage with with this intrusive feeling, I think. So I decided to start chronicling his day-to-day life. So I would take screenshots of him and then draw them with a pencil, and then use gouache to put them together as painted panels. And then for the comic book, I put timestamps underneath to show the passing of time. And often I would also use an indication of my presence. So sometimes I would, for example, leave the cursor on the panel, or here in this case, for example, I was adjusting the brightness of my screen. So because the book is to a large amount not only about Ari, but it's about me in a way, watching him. But I'm at the same time, I'm not really depicted in the book, except for two exceptions. I wanted to yeah, leave these kind of signs of my presence, or the reader's presence in a way, yeah, to illustrate that. And then also I was engaging with him through anonymous online conversations on his website. So he had this chat room where you could just log in, and you didn't have to register or anything. It was just an anonymous, so you just needed a username to enter the chat room. And loads of these conversations I documented in the book, so they are kind of what kind of sets up the narrative in the book. And as a username, I chose the name L.B. Jeffries, which is a reference to Alfred Hitchcock's main character in Rear Window. So just quickly to sum up the film, it's about L.B. Jeffries, who is a photographer, and he's bound to his apartment due to an injury. So he starts observing his neighbors through his courtyard window. And we, as the audience, we are limited to his version of events as he observes his neighbors, and yeah, and also kind of documents what's the stories that are unfolding in the window, kind of movie screen like windows, just opposite his courtyard. And then there's obviously this whole murder mystery that in a way we is all put together by him, and we are always limited to his view. And I think I wanted to, yeah, I was quite yeah, I saw an analogy in the way maybe I was watching Ari, because me too, I was in charge of putting the story together. So I was the one who got to decide what's important for the story and what not, and the reader is only is restricted to my view. So I have one conversation here that I thought I could, I'm going to read out to you. And there's also other users that joined the chat, but I'm just, in order to make it less confusing, I'm just going to read out what I wrote to Ari, and then what Ari responded to me verbally. So L.B. Jeffries, web chat at host 95195138143, mobile online telia.com has joined #Cyberman. Hi Cyberman, how are you doing? I'm fine, Jeffries, how are you? I'm okay, thank you. I'm having a nice time watching the stream. What are you eating, Cyberman? Fresh coffee with some soft cake. I can't eat anything hard because I don't have any teeth. I saw you had a cat. Where is she? My cat is outdoor cat. She's very often outside for many days. I hope that soon my cat will stay inside. I'm often in bad mood because my cat is outside in the woods. Oh, okay. And do you spend all your time live streaming online? Yes, I'm online 24/7. I have two things in my life what makes me happy: fans and streaming. Somebody has said that my life is like a real life Truman Show. I'm like boy in bubble. Right, so so I think to a great extent my interest in Cyberman emerged because I saw myself in some ways reflected in him as well. And I think there's I think that a graphic novel is quite a suitable medium in a way to emphasize matters of solitude, because the stories are being told through panels. And just as Ari was kind of isolated in the panels that were floating on the page. Yeah, I was sitting in front of my computer screen, watching him through another frame. And I think even, I think that watching someone incorporate something quite powerful, especially from a female perspective, because literature and film are highly appropriated by men. So I think part of me also wanted to kind of turn around that narrative of the male voyeur, who's usually a spy, or yeah. But obviously, I think an important part for me about this project was to stay sensitive, obviously, towards him. And yeah, I think from the beginning, this project put up quite a few ethical issues for me, because I was worried that it might be in some ways exploitative, or he would not be happy about it. But then I was quite glad when I sent him a version of the book that he was actually really excited. So yeah, that was lucky. Yeah, how are we doing on time, by the way?
I think you've got 1.5 minutes left.
Okay. I have just at last I have another excerpt that I don't know if we have time for, but I could play it out if you like.
I think it's fine. You want to show?
So this is he also listened to music on YouTube and also documentaries. So this is one where he's listening to one about simulated realities. And I thought it was quite interesting. So when I was watching him, I only heard the audio recording, and I recorded it with my phone. And then in the book it's transcribed. But here I used the actual recording to show you. So maybe I'll just play it.
In order to intentionally influence reality and consciously create your life, you must override subconscious programming and make conscious choices. But in order to do so, you must play the game of life as your higher self. Unfortunately, this is no easy feat when we have amnesia of our higher selves, and, consequently, we experience a virtual version of ourselves trapped within the confines of a simulated world where limitation and fear seem to rule. However, with utmost certainty, awakening as your higher self allows you to transcend the simulated construct that predetermines your life, and, therefore, your ability to consciously affect reality is directly related to your level of consciousness. The more conscious you are, the more power you have. Hence, in order to play the game as your higher self, you must wake up and remember who you really are. Lesson number 3. Waking up is the key to mastering your virtual reality. Immersed in subconscious programming, we are unaware, but as we are able to observe ourselves, we become self-aware, thereby increasing individual consciousness, and, if we continue to progress through self-awareness, eventually we awaken as the observer, which is another word for higher self. This is commonly known as spiritual awakening, but you don't just awaken the spirit of your higher self, you actually awaken as your higher self. When your real self is awake and consciously playing the game, you have the power to influence reality from inside the simulation, thereby transcending the ego, as well as deactivating subconscious programming, and even rewriting your own DNA coding or overriding astrological code, if you so choose. Spiritual awakening is not a destination as much as it is a moment-to-moment choice, and simply being present in the now awakens your higher self for as long as you are conscious.
That's me.